Rain pressed against the glass panes of the precinct windows like an impatient visitor. The storm had arrived early that night, swallowing the town in a curtain of gray water. Detective Raymond Cole sat hunched over a half-empty desk, papers scattered, coffee cooling. His tie hung loose, his shoulders heavier than the coat draped behind him. He rubbed his temples and stared at the thin file before him. A young woman, 21, vanished 3 nights ago after leaving her night shift at a diner. To anyone else, it looked like another missing persons case in a city already worn down by them. But Raymond knew there was something off. The girl's shift ended at midnight. Her car was found locked, keys inside, no sign of struggle. And yet something gnawed at him, an invisible thread he couldn't name. For a man who had once been called brilliant, obsession had become his curse. Raymond's marriage was crumbling under its own weight. He hadn't been home for dinner in weeks. His wife, Eleanor, had stopped waiting up for him. When she spoke, her voice had sharpened into something brittle, as though years of disappointment had calcified into contempt. He stared down at his badge resting on the desk, silver dulled from years of handling. For Raymond, it was more than a symbol of duty. It was the only thing tethering him to purpose, to identity. Without it, he feared he was nothing. "Cole," a voice called from the hallway. Sergeant Bill Harmon leaned against the door frame, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Go home, you've been at this all day. Missing girls don't always come back." "You know that." Raymond didn't look up. "She's not just another girl. Someone wanted her gone." "I can feel it," Harmon smirked, exhaling smoke. "You always feel something. That's what's killing you. Go home before your wife files her own missing persons report." The words stung, but Raymond stayed silent. Harmon left, boots echoing down the hall, leaving Raymond alone with the rain. He slipped the file into his briefcase, slid his badge into his pocket, and rose. His reflection in the dark window startled him. Unshaven, eyes ringed with fatigue, the faint tremor in his hands. He looked less like a detective and more like one of the lost men he often interviewed. By the time he stepped outside, the storm had swelled. Water streamed down the streets, pooling around the tires of parked cars. The neon sign of the precinct flickered weakly in the downpour. Raymond pulled his trench coat tight and lit a cigarette beneath the brim of his hat, shielding the flame against the wind. His car waited at the curb, but he didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he sat behind the wheel, file open across the passenger seat, watching the raindrops smear across the windshield. He thought of Eleanor, her silence at the dinner table, the untouched glass of wine, the way she had turned her back to him in bed the night before. He wanted to fix it, to tell her he still loved her, but the words had become foreign in his mouth. With a weary sigh, he turned the key. Headlights cut through the sheets of rain as the car rolled away from the curb. He drove not toward home, but toward the last place the missing girl had been seen. Hours later, his car was found parked along a wooded stretch of road outside the city. Driver's door ajar, interior dry despite the rain. His briefcase sat on the seat, file still inside. But Raymond Cole was gone, gone without a sound, gone without a trace. The storm swallowed the rest. The storm had not eased by dawn. The old coal house sat beneath heavy skies, its windows dim, its roof rattling under the last gusts of rain. Inside, Eleanor Cole stirred awake, the sheets cool against her skin. She reached out instinctively toward the other side of the bed and froze. The space was untouched, the blanket still neatly folded, the pillow still indented from the night before. Raymond hadn't come home. At first, she told herself he'd worked through the night again, that he would stumble in any minute exhausted, smelling of cigarettes and rain, mumbling an apology he barely meant. But minutes slid into an hour, and her chest grew heavier with each tick of the kitchen clock. She brewed coffee, poured 2 mugs out of habit, then set his down on the counter untouched. The silence pressed against her like a weight. It wasn't new. Silence had long replaced conversation between them, but today it felt sharper, like a blade drawn across her throat. By late morning, she picked up the phone and dialed the precinct. "Detective Cole hasn't come in," the desk sergeant replied flatly. "His car was found near County Road 7, no sign of him." The words hollowed her. "No sign of him?" "Not yet, ma'am. We're looking." She hung up slowly, hands trembling. For years she had imagined losing him. Not to violence, but to distance, to indifference, to the slow rot of their marriage. But not like this. Not vanished into thin air. By noon, uniformed officers filled her living room, their radios crackling. Questions poured in. When had she last seen him? Did he seem troubled? Had he argued with anyone? She answered in clipped tones, eyes fixed on the floor. One detective, a younger man with sharp features, leaned closer. "Mrs. Cole, sometimes when men carry the kind of burden your husband did, they walk away. Is there any chance he might have left of his own accord?" Her head snapped up. Raymond wouldn't run. The officer gave a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everyone runs from something. The insinuation coiled in her stomach like poison. As the hours dragged on, she overheard whispers she wasn't meant to hear. About debts, about women, about secrets her husband supposedly kept. Each rumor felt like another betrayal, not from him, but from the men who had called him brother. That night, when the house emptied again, Eleanor stood in the doorway of their bedroom. The untouched bed seemed to mock her. She pressed her hand to the cold sheets, whispering his name into the silence as though it might call him back. But the house did not answer. Only the faint groan of wood in the storm's aftershock. For the first time, the possibility struck her. Maybe Raymond hadn't just disappeared. Maybe someone wanted him gone. She poured herself a glass of wine, hands unsteady, and sat by the window watching rain streak down the glass. The badge, his badge, usually tossed carelessly on the dresser, was missing. She hadn't noticed until now. Her throat tightened. Had he taken it with him into the night? Or had someone else taken it from him? The question followed her into restless sleep. A gnawing whisper that wouldn't fade. And outside, in the city's precinct halls, the first cracks of rumor spread. Detectives trading stories behind closed doors, wondering aloud whether Raymond Cole had been abducted, deserted, or something darker still. The wine glass still sat by the window the next morning, half empty, ringed with Eleanor's fingerprints. She had slept little, waking every hour to glance at the clock, hoping for footsteps at the door. None came. By mid-morning, she was back at the precinct, face pale but composed. The detectives greeted her with practiced sympathy, but beneath their voices lingered something colder. Hesitation, doubt. She felt it like a draft in the room. Captain Donahue, a broad man with thinning hair, guided her into his office. The blinds were drawn, shutting out the gray daylight. "Mrs. Cole," he began, his voice low, "we're doing everything we can. But I have to ask some difficult questions." Eleanor nodded, though her throat felt raw. Was Raymond under any pressure, gambling debts maybe? Trouble at home? Her eyes narrowed. "You think he walked out on me?" Donahue cleared his throat. "I think we have to consider all angles. Men sometimes, he's not just men, Captain. He's my husband." He wouldn't vanish. The room stilled. Donahue's gaze slid from her face to a file on his desk. A thin folder, Raymond's name scrawled across it. Eleanor recognized it instantly. It was the same file he had carried home the night before he disappeared. The missing girl, her breath caught. That's the case he was working on. "Isn't it?" Donahue closed the folder slowly, as if concealing something. Routine work. Nothing that would get him in trouble. But she saw it. The flicker of unease in his eyes. They knew more than they were telling her. When she left the office, the whispers followed her through the corridor. She caught fragments, debts, another woman, stepped on the wrong toes. Each word struck like a dart. The brotherhood of blue that had once felt like Raymond's second family now seemed like a wall of silence, built high to keep her out. That night, back in her kitchen, she dialed Patrick Hale, the journalist who had once covered Raymond's big corruption bust in '83. He still remembered her voice. "Mrs. Cole?" His tone was careful, curious. "They're hiding something," she whispered. "They think I'll just sit here and wait, but I can feel it." Raymond didn't run. Someone made him disappear. Patrick exhaled slowly on the other end. "If you want the truth, it won't come easy. The badge protects its own." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "Then we find a way to break through." She hung up before he could answer, her pulse hammering. For the first time, grief gave way to resolve. If the police would not give her answers, she would force them out. Later that week, she went through Raymond's study, searching for anything the precinct hadn't already taken. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath unpaid bills and old case notes, she found a torn notebook page. Scrawled across it in his hurried hand were 4 words: "The badge's silence." Her fingers trembled as she held the scrap. What had he meant? A warning? A confession? The phrase echoed through her mind long after midnight, heavy with implication. She pressed it into her palm until the edges cut her skin, as though pain might help her decipher the message. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the moonlight. But in Eleanor's world, the storm had only deepened. Somewhere out there, her husband's badge still existed. And she knew with a bone-deep certainty, if she found it, she would find the truth. The torn page sat on the kitchen table, its edges frayed, its message seared into Eleanor's mind. The badge is silence. She stared at it for hours, the words blurring until they felt like a curse. By the third day of Raymond's disappearance, the rumors began to seep beyond the precinct walls. Whispers traveled through the town like smoke through old floorboards, thin, poisonous, impossible to catch. Patrick Hale, the journalist she had called in desperation, arrived at her door with a notepad tucked under his arm, and that cautious curiosity in his eyes. He was younger than Raymond by a decade, but time had not spared him. Lines of sleepless nights carved into his face, the faint smell of whiskey clinging to his coat. "Mrs. Cole," he greeted softly. "You said they're hiding something. I need specifics. If I push too hard without proof, they'll shut me out before I even begin." Eleanor slid the page across the table. "This is what he left behind. Tell me what it means." Patrick studied the words, lips pressed thin. "It sounds like a warning. When cops go against their own, the Brotherhood closes ranks. It's not just loyalty, it's survival. Your husband might have been digging somewhere he wasn't welcome." Her hands tightened around her coffee mug. "They're saying he left me. That he had debts. That he..." Her voice cracked. "That he had another woman." Patrick's gaze lingered on her. "And do you believe them?" She shook her head sharply. "I don't know what to believe anymore. I just know he didn't walk away from his badge. He lived for it." Patrick scribbled a note. "I'll start with his last case. Missing girl, 21. If there's a connection, it's buried there." Over the next week, Eleanor heard the whispers grow bolder. Neighbors dropped their voices when she walked by. At the market, 2 women exchanged looks and muttered, "Heard he had a gambling problem. Lost more than he could pay." At church, someone dared to say, "Men like him always have secrets." Maybe she wasn't the only one. Each word chipped at her resolve, leaving bruises where there should have been comfort. Betrayal was no longer just a possibility. It was a shadow creeping into every corner of her life. One evening, she found herself back at the precinct, waiting in the hall while officers avoided her eyes. Detective Frank Mercer, Raymond's longtime partner, approached at last. He wore his badge like armor, jaw clenched, voice low. "Eleanor, you need to stop asking questions." Her heart pounded. "Why? Don't I deserve to know what happened to my husband?" Mercer glanced around, then leaned close. "You won't like the answers, Raymond. He wasn't the man you thought he was." The words struck like a blow. "That's a lie." Mercer's eyes softened for just a moment, guilt flickering, quickly buried. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her trembling in the hallway, the echo of his boots like a gavel closing judgment. That night, Patrick called with news. His voice buzzed through the receiver, tense with urgency. "I found her," he said. "The missing girl your husband was investigating. She's not just a case file. She once called Raymond her only protector. And she's alive." Eleanor's breath caught. "Alive? Where?" "I can't tell you yet." She's terrified. But she said one thing that changed everything. Raymond wasn't chasing her disappearance. He was chasing the person who made her disappear in the first place. The silence on the line stretched, heavy as stone. Eleanor pressed the torn note against her chest, the words cutting into her palm. "The badge is silent." If Raymond had truly uncovered something inside the Brotherhood, then his disappearance wasn't desertion. It was punishment. And somewhere the truth lay waiting to be unearthed. The years that followed were a blur of unanswered questions and quiet decay. Eleanor grew older, her hair silvering, her heart calcifying around the hollow space Raymond left behind. Patrick Hale published articles, some naming corruption, others drowned in denials. Nothing ever stuck. Nothing ever broke the silence. By 2011, 25 years had passed. The case was all but forgotten, reduced to dusty files in a locked cabinet, until the woods gave up what they had been keeping. It began with 2 hikers cutting through an old trail near County Road 7, the same road where Raymond's car had been found. The storm the night before had uprooted trees, loosened soil, stripped the forest bare, One of them noticed a glint beneath the wet leaves. At first it looked like scrap metal, rusted and bent, but when he brushed it clean, the emblem came into view, a tarnished badge, silver dulled, the number still etched clear, Detective Raymond Cole. The hikers froze, holding the piece of metal like it might burn them. And perhaps it did, because the woods had spoken and in doing so stirred a ghost back into the world. News spread quickly, tearing open wounds thought long scarred. Eleanor sat in her kitchen when the knock came. A young officer delivered the news, eyes lowered, voice uncertain. "They found something, Mrs. Cole, out near the woods. It's his badge." Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the years collapsed. She saw him again, lighting a cigarette under a rain-soaked brim, muttering about cases no one else believed in. She pressed her hand against the counter to steady herself. "Where exactly?" she whispered. The officer hesitated. "Near where the car was, but deeper, like it had been buried." Eleanor's knees weakened. She forced herself upright. "That means someone put it there." "He didn't drop it," the young man said nothing, but in his silence she heard agreement. By the next morning, the story had reignited like dry timber catching flame. Reporters swarmed the precinct. Television anchors revisited grainy photographs of Raymond. The narrative split between two versions of the man, heroic detective or flawed deserter. Patrick Hale returned, older now, hair thinner, eyes more tired, but the fire had not left him. He found Eleanor on her porch staring out at the street as though expecting Raymond to appear. "They can't bury it anymore," Patrick said quietly. "The badge is proof. Someone carried it into those woods." Her eyes narrowed. "Then we find out who." Patrick leaned on the railing. "The timing is curious. 25 years and it surfaces now. It feels deliberate, like someone wants the story told again." The thought unsettled her. For decades she had begged for answers, and now suddenly a breadcrumb appeared. Had guilt finally driven someone to loosen their grip on silence? Or was this another manipulation? Another cruel twist to keep her chained to shadows? Later, investigators combed the site where the badge was discovered. The soil was disturbed, not recently, but not from natural erosion either. Dogs sniffed, men dug, shovels scraped against stone and root. They found no body, no bones, only the badge wrapped in a decayed scrap of fabric, part of a coat sleeve weathered beyond recognition. Still, it was enough. Enough to remind the world that Raymond Cole had not simply vanished. His ghost was tethered to those woods, demanding to be found. Eleanor held the badge that evening when they returned it to her, its weight heavy in her palm. Rust flaked off on her skin. She pressed it to her lips, whispering a prayer through tears she thought had dried decades ago. "The badge is silence," she murmured. But silence doesn't last forever. The badge sat on Eleanor's dresser, dull and heavy, like a relic pulled from the grave. For days she could not stop looking at it. She would catch her reflection in the mirror, an older woman, hair streaked silver, face weathered, and the badge beside her, a reminder of who she had once been tethered to. When detectives came to question her again, she greeted them with calm precision, though her heart trembled. They laid out old photographs of Raymond, his car, his case files, and asked the same questions she had answered 25 years ago. "When did you last see him? What mood was he in? Did he mention anyone?" Their voices droned like a chorus rehearsing lines they had spoken too many times before. But this time, Eleanor did not simply answer. She studied their faces, their eyes, searching for the flicker of guilt, the hint of knowledge unsaid. And in one of them, a young detective shifting in his seat, she caught it. Discomfort. She leaned forward, voice sharper now. "You think you know what happened to him?" "Don't you?" The man blinked. "Mrs. Cole, we're just following procedure." "No," she cut him off. "You're following silence. That's all you've ever done?" The room chilled. The senior officer cleared his throat and gathered the files. "Thank you, Mrs. Cole. We'll be in touch." When the door shut behind them, Eleanor sagged into her chair, anger mixing with exhaustion. For decades, she had been treated as fragile, as if grief had stripped her voice. But grief had not destroyed her, it had sharpened her. That night, Patrick Hale returned. He found her in the living room, staring at the badge under the dim lamp glow. "You look tired," he said gently. She glanced up. "Tired doesn't cover 25 years. Patrick sat across from her, notebook ready. "You told me once you believed he had an affair." That rumor came from inside the precinct. Was it true? Her lips tightened. For years she had carried the suspicion quietly, folding it into her grief like a poison she could not spit out. Now with the badge back in her hands, she could no longer bury it. Yes, she whispered, but not with the girl they talked about. It wasn't just some young thing from the diner. It was closer than that. Patrick's pen paused. Closer how? Eleanor's eyes glistened, but her voice steadied. A woman inside the force, someone he worked beside. I knew it by the way he came home, the way he avoided my eyes. And once I found a note in his jacket pocket. No name, just words. You're the only one I trust. Patrick leaned forward, pulse quickening. Do you still have it? Her gaze fell to the badge. I burned it. I thought if I destroyed the evidence, I could destroy the betrayal. But it never left me. Silence filled the room, thick with unspoken truths. Eleanor's hands trembled as she lifted the badge. Maybe she's still out there. Maybe she knows what happened. Patrick scribbled furiously. But Eleanor's eyes, dark and steady, burned with a new kind of resolve. Later, alone again. She stood by the window, badge pressed to her chest. Her reflection stared back at her, older, harder, but unbroken. She whispered to the glass, "If you loved her, Raymond, I'll find out. And if she took you from me, I'll make her answer." Her voice cracked, but the vow held. Outside, the woods lay quiet under a crescent moon, but secrets did not sleep. They waited, buried deep, waiting for eyes sharp enough to see them. And Eleanor's eyes had finally opened. Patrick Hale drove home with Eleanor's words rattling in his skull like loose bullets. Closer than that. A woman inside the force. He replayed the detail again and again. In his years of chasing ghosts and cold cases, he had learned one rule above all others. When betrayal lives inside the institution, silence grows like rot. By morning, he was at the archives. Dust clung to the air, the scent of mold and paper thick enough to choke. He pulled Raymond Cole's old case files, the internal reports from '86, the logs of who worked that week. One name kept recurring in the margins, never central but always present. Detective Linda Marrow, a rising star at the time. Sharp, ambitious, and gone from the force 2 years after Raymond vanished, her departure buried in paperwork listed simply as resigned. Patrick sat back, staring at the name. Resigned or removed. He reached out to one of his contacts, a retired lieutenant who owed him favors. Over a crackling phone line, Patrick asked the question straight. "What do you remember about Linda Marrow?" A pause, then a weary chuckle. She was too good for her own good. Got close to Cole. Too close, some said. Then one day she just disappeared from the department. No goodbye, no farewell. Just gone. Patrick's pulse quickened. Do you know where she went? Last I heard, Colorado. But if you're stirring that pot, Hale, be careful. Cops don't like their ghosts dug up. That night, Patrick returned to Eleanor's house. She opened the door slowly, her face pale but expectant. You found something, she said. He nodded, stepping inside. Her name was Linda Marrow. She worked alongside your husband. They were close. Too close, according to some. Eleanor's grip tightened on the edge of the doorframe. The name hit her like a stone to the chest. So she was real. I wasn't just imagining it. Patrick studied her carefully. Do you want the truth, Eleanor? Because if I chase this, there's no guarantee it won't cut deeper than you expect. She looked past him toward the empty mantel where her husband's photograph once stood. Truth is all I've ever wanted. Lies are what buried him. The deeper Patrick dug, the more the brotherhood of silence revealed itself. Old colleagues dodged his calls. Retired officers shut doors in his face. Some grew hostile. Let it go, Hale. Cole wasn't a saint. You dig too far, you'll only hurt the widow more. But their resistance told him everything. The story was alive. Still raw, still dangerous. In a bar on the outskirts of town, Patrick finally cornered one man willing to talk after too many drinks. A former sergeant, eyes bloodshot, voice slurred. Cole, he wasn't just chasing some missing girl. He was chasing us. The whole unit. We were dirty. Payoffs, kickbacks, evidence gone missing, he knew. He was going to blow it open. Patrick's stomach turned. And Linda? The man laughed bitterly. Linda? She wasn't his weakness. She was his ally. The only one who stood with him. That's why they buried her too. Patrick drove back through the rain, mind on fire. Eleanor had believed in betrayal, but the truth was sharper. Raymond hadn't strayed. he had fought, and someone had silenced him for it. When he told Eleanor, her reaction stunned him. She didn't collapse, didn't wail. Instead, her eyes hardened with quiet rage. "So all these years," she whispered, "I hated him for loving someone else, and all along he died for loving the truth." Patrick said nothing. The badge on her dresser caught the lamplight, glinting like a wound. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky, as if the earth itself groaned under the weight of secrets. And within that storm, Eleanor Cole finally understood. The Brotherhood had not just taken her husband, they had taken her life. Rain hammered against Patrick Hale's windshield as he drove through the outskirts of town. Eleanor's words still echoing in his ears. He died for loving the truth. The puzzle was reshaping itself. Raymond Cole hadn't been a deserter or a cheater. He had been a whistleblower, cornered by the very men he worked beside. And if that were true, then someone, somewhere, had seen enough to know what happened that night in 1986. Patrick found his lead in a faded case file, an overlooked witness statement buried among routine reports. The name Samuel Price, a drifter who claimed he saw a police cruiser near County Road 7 the night Cole vanished. The statement was marked unreliable and dismissed. But Patrick had learned long ago. The unreliable witnesses were often the ones telling truths nobody wanted to hear. He tracked Price to a rundown trailer park 2 counties over. The air reeked of gasoline and mildew, the kind of place where time stood still. Patrick knocked on the dented metal door. After a long silence, the door creaked open. A man in his 60s, gaunt and gray, peered out with wary eyes. "You Samuel Price?" Patrick asked. The man squinted. "Depends who's asking. I'm not a cop." "Name's Patrick Hale. I'm investigating the disappearance of Detective Raymond Cole." The name sent a visible shiver through Price. He glanced over Patrick's shoulder at the rain-slick road, then opened the door just wide enough. "You shouldn't be here." "They still watch me." Patrick stepped inside. The trailer smelled of stale beer and old smoke. Piles of newspapers were stacked against the walls. Price sat heavily on a sagging couch, his hands trembling. "I saw it," he whispered. "I told them back then, but they called me a drunk, said I was seeing things." "But I wasn't." Patrick leaned forward. "Tell me what you saw." Price's eyes darted to the window as though ghosts still lingered outside. Then he spoke, voice low, urgent. "Night he disappeared, I was walking the highway, trying to hitch a ride. Storm was coming down hard. Then I saw 2 cruisers pull off into the woods. Not 1, 2. I knew one was Cole, saw him get out. He wasn't alone. A couple of his own men were with him. They were shouting. Then his voice cracked. Then there was a shot, echoed through the trees. I ran." Patrick's chest tightened. "Did you see who pulled the trigger?" Price shook his head violently. "Too dark. But I know this, those weren't strangers. They were cops. His own." The room fell silent except for the rattle of rain. Patrick's instincts screamed that this was no delusion. Samuel Price had carried the memory like a curse for 25 years. Before Patrick could press further, Price grabbed his arm. His grip was desperate, eyes wide with fear. "If you're chasing this, you'd better run faster than they hunt. Men like that, they don't stop killing." Driving back through the storm, Patrick replayed the testimony in his mind. 2 cruisers, a shouting match, a gunshot. It fit too neatly with the rumors of corruption, with Linda Merrow's sudden disappearance, with Eleanor's missing years of grief. When he returned to Eleanor, her face paled at the mention of a witness. "So it's true," she whispered. "They killed him." "His brothers," Patrick nodded grimly. "But now we have a voice. A man who saw it happen." Eleanor's gaze hardened, the tremor in her hands betraying her calm. "Then we protect him, and we finish this." Patrick looked at her. A widow who had lived in silence for decades, now staring into the abyss without blinking. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just his investigation. It was hers too. Outside, lightning cracked across the horizon, illuminating the woods in violent flashes. Somewhere in those trees, Raymond Cole's blood had been spilled, and now, with a witness alive and willing to talk, the Brotherhood's secrets were no longer safe. The storm had passed by morning, but the woods still wept. Rain dripped from the pine needles in slow, steady drops, the earth soft and swollen with mud. Patrick Hale parked his car at the edge of County Road 7, headlights cutting a weak beam into the dense tree line. Eleanor Cole sat beside him, silent, her face a pale mask of resolve. "This is where Samuel said it happened," Patrick murmured. Eleanor stared into the forest. He died out there, and I've been sleeping in our bed all these years while he lay in the dirt. Patrick hesitated, then reached for a flashlight. We don't know what we'll find, but if he was killed here, there may still be something the rain couldn't wash away. They stepped into the woods, the air damp and heavy with the smell of moss and decay. Every crack of a twig beneath their boots echoed too loudly, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Deeper in, the trees thickened. The ground sloped into a hollow where water pooled in shallow depressions. Patrick's light swept across broken branches, then froze on a shape half buried in mud. It was a rusted fragment of metal. A bullet casing, Eleanor gasped softly. She bent down, brushing it with trembling fingers. After all this time, Patrick pocketed it carefully. His pulse raced, not because of what they had found, but because of what it meant. Samuel Price's story was real. A confrontation had happened here, and someone had wanted it buried. They pressed on, guided by instinct more than direction. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Even the birds seemed absent, as though the woods remembered what had been done and refused to speak of it. Then Eleanor stopped suddenly, the beam of her flashlight trembling. Patrick, look. At the base of a pine tree, half swallowed by roots and soil, something gleamed faintly in the mud. He knelt, brushing the dirt away with careful hands. It was a badge. Tarnished but unmistakable. Raymond Cole's badge. Eleanor fell to her knees, her hand covering her mouth. A sound tore from her throat, half sob, half scream. He was here, all along. They left him here like garbage. Patrick closed his eyes, the weight of the discovery pressing on him. The badge was not just evidence, it was a confession, buried by time but not erased. Whoever had thrown it into the soil had believed the earth would keep their secret forever, but the earth had betrayed them. Eleanor's grief shifted to fury. She clutched the badge to her chest, her voice shaking. This isn't just proof. This is him. His fight. His truth. They can't hide anymore. Patrick studied her face, lit harshly by the flashlight glow. She was no longer the broken widow waiting for answers. She was a woman armed with rage, and he realized the Brotherhood might fear her more than they feared him. Still, unease gnawed at him. If the badge had remained here for 25 years untouched, it meant no one had dared return. That kind of silence wasn't accidental. It was enforced. And if the Brotherhood caught wind that the silence had been broken, there would be consequences. As they retraced their steps out of the woods, Eleanor walked differently, head high, jaw set. Her fist clenched tightly around the badge. Patrick felt the shift in the air. This wasn't just a search for answers anymore. It was a declaration of war. The pines swayed above them, whispering with the wind. Somewhere in the shadows, the memory of gunfire lingered, carried on the damp night air. Raymond Cole had vanished in these woods, consumed by betrayal. But tonight, beneath the pines, his voice had returned. By the time Patrick Hale and Eleanor Cole reached town, dawn was breaking pale and cold. The badge lay between them on the dashboard, a tarnished relic glowing faintly in the rising light. Neither spoke. The silence was too heavy, filled with everything the badge represented: betrayal, murder, and a truth buried for 25 years. At the precinct, Patrick stepped carefully, knowing the walls themselves had ears. He brought the casing and the badge to his trusted contact in forensics, a woman named Dr. Karen Whitlow, who owed him more than one favor. She examined the items under harsh fluorescent light. Bullet casing's old, weathered, but it can still be matched to a firearm. The badge. Patrick, this isn't just evidence. It's a ghost dragged out of the dirt. He leaned closer. Then let it speak. Karen nodded, but her voice dropped to a whisper. If the department gets wind of this before you're ready, they'll lock it down. You know what you're stirring up, don't you? Patrick thought of Eleanor clutching the badge in the woods, her eyes aflame with rage. Yeah, I know. Later that day, word spread faster than Patrick anticipated. A retired officer was seen lingering around the courthouse, whispering about Cole's ghost. Another had been spotted driving slowly past Eleanor's house. The Brotherhood was shifting, restless. They felt the crack in their wall of silence, and cracks had a way of widening into collapse. Patrick warned Eleanor. They know we found something, he said as they sat in her kitchen. Blinds drawn tight, Eleanor's jaw tightened. Let them know. I want them afraid. Her defiance burned like fire. But Patrick also saw the shadow behind her eyes, the knowledge that fear cuts both ways. That night, Patrick was followed. The black sedan kept its distance but never disappeared, tailing him through side streets until he pulled into a crowded diner parking lot. Only then did it peel away, its headlights fading into the dark. When he returned to Eleanor, she was waiting by the window, clutching the badge. "They're circling, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Patrick nodded. "They're watching every move, but that means they're scared. And scared men make mistakes." The mistake came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, Karen Whitlow called in a hushed voice. "Patrick, you need to hear this. I tested the casing. It matches a service revolver, registered to Sergeant David Kincaid." Patrick's blood ran cold. Kincaid, the man who had once led Raymond's unit, now a revered figure in retirement, untouched by scandal. "That's not all," Karen continued. "The chain of custody logs for Cole's disappearance were doctored. I compared signatures. Someone tried to erase Kincaid's involvement." Patrick hung up, his heart pounding. The Brotherhood's cracks weren't just rumors now. They were fractures exposing names, men who had carried themselves as untouchable. When he told Eleanor, her reaction was quiet, almost too quiet. "Kincaid," she whispered, rolling the name on her tongue like venom. "He sat in my living room after Ray vanished. Told me they'd do everything to find him, all the while knowing." Her hand closed around the badge until her knuckles went white. Patrick studied her face, recognizing something new. This wasn't grief anymore. It was a vow. "They'll come for us now," he said. Eleanor met his gaze, then let them. "For 25 years I've been living in their silence. I'm ready to make them hear the truth." The next morning, a story broke in the local paper. A small leak, anonymous, untraceable, but enough to stir panic. Detective's badge found in woods, investigation reopened. Phones rang across the precinct. Retired officers locked their doors. And somewhere in the shadows, the Brotherhood began to fracture. The weight of their secrets too heavy to hold. Raymond Cole's ghost was no longer quiet. And Patrick knew, when ghosts speak, they demand justice. The warehouse air was thick with mildew and gasoline, a suffocating cocktail of rot and rust. Rain pelted the roof in relentless rhythm, echoing like a war drum in the cavernous dark. Eleanor stood at the threshold, trembling but resolute, the badge clutched tightly in her palm. It was Raymond's badge, cold metal, worn smooth by years of duty. It had once been his pride. Now it was her weapon. Detective Frank Hensley hovered a step behind her, gun at his hip, jaw set. They weren't here for evidence anymore. They were here to end something that had started a lifetime ago. Shadows moved ahead. 4 men stepped from the gloom, faces hard, eyes gleaming like predators. At their center, hands folded calmly, stood Captain Kincaid. His uniform jacket was crisp despite the decay of the warehouse around him, his polished shoes shining against the filth. Authority clung to him like armor. "Eleanor," Kincaid said, voice smooth as silk, "you shouldn't be here. This is police business." Her laugh broke sharply in the hollow space. "Police business? You mean cover-ups, lies, and the bodies you left in the dirt? My husband bled for that badge, and you made him disappear." Kincaid's eyes narrowed. Raymond chose his path. He dug too deep. Curiosity gets men killed. Eleanor stepped closer, rain-soaked hair clinging to her cheeks. Her grief had burned away, leaving only steel. "Then tell me, was it curiosity that killed him? Or loyalty to a brotherhood that protects monsters like you?" For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Kincaid's face. The men around him shifted, uncertainty breaking through their rigid stance. Hensley drew his gun. "It's over, Captain. Internal affairs has enough to bury you. But Eleanor deserves the truth." Kincaid smiled, though the edges were cracking. "Truth is a luxury, Detective. You think people want to know their protectors are killers? That their shield is stained?" Raymond understood the game. He just couldn't play it. Eleanor raised the badge high, her voice trembling but fierce. "He didn't fail. You failed him. This," she shook the badge, its metal glint catching the light, "isn't a shield anymore. It's a tombstone." The silence stretched, the rain hammering above like judgment. One of the men lowered his eyes, then his gun. Another followed. The Brotherhood was fracturing, its foundation of silence crumbling under the weight of truth. Kincaid's calm dissolved into rage. He lunged, hand snapping toward his holster. But Hensley was faster. The crack of gunfire shattered the warehouse. Kincaid staggered, blood blooming across his chest like a dark flower. His eyes locked on Eleanor as he fell, disbelief etched into his final breath. The other men didn't move. Some turned and fled into the shadows. Others stood frozen, their allegiance broken, their empire collapsing. Eleanor stood rooted, the badge heavy in her hand, her chest heaving. She hadn't come for blood. She had come for the truth. And in the echoing silence after the gunshot, she knew she had found it. Not in words, but in the fall of a man who thought himself untouchable. Hensley holstered his weapon, his face pale. "It's over," but Eleanor shook her head. "No, it never ends. Men like Kincaid, they leave stains that never wash away." She pressed the badge to her heart, her voice breaking. But at least now Raymond can rest. That night the rain finally stopped. By morning, news cameras circled the warehouse, their lights flashing against shattered glass and peeling walls. Reporters spoke of corruption, betrayal, and a captain unmasked as a criminal. But Eleanor said nothing. She stood apart, silent, holding the badge as though it were all she had left of her husband. The system would spin the story, twist the edges, find scapegoats and saviors, but she knew the truth. The shield was broken, its gleam forever tarnished, and yet, in that ruin, Raymond's voice seemed to whisper. Not in despair, but in defiance. His silence had spoken louder than their lies. His absence had dragged their darkness into the light. Eleanor walked away from the flashing cameras, the badge clutched tight. Not as a relic of betrayal, but as a promise, his promise that justice, however brutal, always leaves a mark. The badge, once a symbol of duty, now lay heavy in her hand. Not a shield, not a tombstone, but a scar carved into history, ensuring that Detective Raymond Cole would never vanish again.